Hello, my name's Allie. 3 weeks ago, my sister fractured my skull because I wouldn't give her money for her Botox appointment. And my mother, the woman who raised me, stood over my hospital bed and said one word. Good. That wasn't the first time they hurt me. It was just the first time I documented everything. The bruises, the bank theft, the fake signatures. They said I was dramatic, that I imagined it all. So why did they forge my name to steal my home? Why did they take out a loan in my name? Why did they leave me with nothing and still call it love? Is that what family looks like? Or is it just abuse, wrapped in obligation and silence? And when I finally fought back, when I took them to court, what do you think happened next? The hallway was darker than usual when I stepped out of my car that night. The porch light flickered as I climbed the steps, shifting the grocery bag against my hip, the paper rustling against my scrubs. I was exhausted, 14 hours on my feet, 2 patients coded, 1 lost. I just wanted a shower, something microwaved, and silence. But Valora was already there. She leaned against the doorframe of my duplex, arms crossed like she owned the place. Her lips were glossy, hair pulled into a too-tight bun. I didn't need to see the smirk forming to know tonight wasn't going to end quietly. "Hey, sis," she drawled. "Got a sec?" My keys stalled halfway into the lock. "Valora, it's late." Her eyes scanned me, unimpressed. "Late for who? I just need 100. That's all. Touch-up appointment tomorrow. Botox. You know how my brand has to stay fresh." I set the groceries down, calmly. "I told you last month, I'm done covering for you. I'm barely managing my own bills." She rolled her eyes so hard it could have spun her into orbit. "God, Allie, you're so tight lately. What happened to family first?" I kept my voice steady. "Family doesn't knock you over every time you say no." That did it. The change in her was instant. Her arms dropped, posture tightened. She stepped forward with that same aggression I'd seen when we were kids, when she pushed me into the bathroom wall for looking at her funny. "You selfish little—" she started, and then her hand was on my collar. It all unraveled fast. She shoved me, hard. My back hit the door. My knees gave way. My bag tumbled to the floor, apples rolling across the doormat. I tried to push her off, but she had my phone in her hand, and before I could speak, the screen cracked across my temple. White-hot pain sliced through my head like broken glass. I heard myself gasp, and then the world dipped sideways. Cold. Floor. Silence. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor shouted. Tires squealed. Then sirens. It felt like I blinked, and everything changed. Hospital ceiling lights burned above me. Beeps. The scent of antiseptic and something warm. Tea. Alma was sitting beside me, my old literature teacher from high school. Her soft curls now grayer, her shoulders still calm, like nothing ever shook her. "Hey, Allie," she whispered, fingers wrapped around a foam coffee cup. "You're safe now." I couldn't move my head. My mouth felt heavy. "Why are you—" She cut me off gently. "I was watching Valora's live. Only for a second. It went black fast. But it was enough." A nurse entered. "Fractured skull, mild concussion. You were lucky," she said, like luck had anything to do with it. I turned to Alma. "Did my mom?" She shook her head. "Not yet." I called her. 3 hours passed before Damaris showed. She didn't rush in. No trembling hands, no swollen eyes. Just strolled in like she was coming to check on a neighbor. Her purse matched her shoes, her hair was set, not a strand out of place. I sat up slowly, pain needling through my spine. "Hi, Mom," she sighed. "I just don't understand what you did to make her that angry." My throat dried instantly. "Excuse me?" Damaris clutched her bag tighter. "You know Valora's temper. If you hadn't provoked her—" "Provoked her?" I repeated. "She fractured my skull." She shrugged. "Still, it's not like you're innocent, always pushing her buttons." "Mom," I said carefully, trying to hold my voice steady. "She hit me. In the head. With my own phone." She nodded, unbothered. "Good." Silence. No wind. No breath. Just that word, dropped like a stone in water. I didn't blink. Didn't flinch. But I felt something in me shift. Something deep and final. That word carried the weight of years. She tapped her bag and glanced at the clock. I have to get to the store before it closes. Do you need anything? Milk? I said nothing, and she left. Later that night, the monitors around me beeped softly in the dark, each sound marking time I'd never get back. I laid there, staring at a crack in the ceiling tile, thinking of every time I kept quiet so Valora wouldn't lash out, every time I let Mom excuse her behavior, every dollar loaned, every bruise ignored, every apology I gave for things I didn't break. The door clicked. A nurse adjusted the drip and whispered, "Try to rest." I nodded, eyes still fixed above. This wasn't the first time, but it'd be the last. The officer's badge caught the morning light as he stepped into my hospital room. I hadn't noticed the sun until that moment, how it filtered in through the blinds, striping the beige walls like prison bars. I shifted in the bed, a dull ache humming at the base of my skull. The nurse beside him looked uncomfortable, like she'd walked in on something sacred and wasn't sure how to retreat. "Ms. Goodwin," he said, voice professional but softened at the edges. "Your sister's statement says you attacked her first. She claims self-defense." For a brief moment, I felt heat surge in my chest, not from anger, but disbelief. It was so Valora, always flipping the script, always the victim. I sat up slowly, head pounding. "I'd like to make a formal statement." He nodded and pulled out a small recorder from his breast pocket. The nurse excused herself, and the door shut behind her with a click that sounded too final. I told him everything, what happened that night, her demand for money, the blow to my head. My voice didn't tremble, not because I wasn't scared, but because I'd spent most of my life practicing calm in chaos. He thanked me, said someone would follow up, and left, just as quietly. When the door closed again, I was alone with the sound of machines beeping, keeping rhythm with thoughts that wouldn't leave me alone. I reached for the small notepad the hospital left by the bedside. Alma had written a note before leaving. "Call me when you're ready. A." I folded it once, tucked it in my palm, and stared out the window. The sky was clear, too blue for a day like this. I don't know what pulled me under, but my eyes drifted shut. And suddenly, I was 12 again. It was my birthday, technically, but no one mentioned it. Valora had an appointment that morning, some last-minute hair thing she couldn't miss. Damaris handed me a towel after breakfast. "Dry those dishes, that's your job." No cake, no gift. I remember opening the fridge, hoping to find even a slice of something sweet. Instead, there was a leftover muffin from the week before. I snuck it to my room, lit the end of a broken birthday candle I'd found in a drawer, and whispered, "Happy birthday, Allie," to the silence. Flash forward 2 years, 14, and finally bold enough to question her. I caught Valora digging through my backpack. I had saved up $42 from babysitting for a neighbor, planning to buy my first decent pair of shoes that weren't hand-me-downs. "What are you doing?" I asked. She didn't even flinch. "Looking for gum." I stepped closer, saw the cash tucked in her fist. "That's my money, Valora," she smirked. "And?" When I didn't back down, she shoved me. My heel caught the edge of the stair, and I tumbled down half a flight. I cried out, loud enough that Damaris came running, but all she did was look at me, soaked in tears, elbow scraped raw, and say, "Stop being dramatic. You're always so sensitive." At 17, it happened again. Valora slapped me across the face during a holiday dinner because I accidentally spilled cranberry sauce on her dress. The guests froze. Someone laughed nervously. Damaris pulled me aside afterward and hissed, "You embarrassed the family. Apologize." I did, like I always did. Back in the hospital room, the weight of those moments pressed against my chest like wet cement. My fingers absent-mindedly grazed the bandage on my forehead, and I whispered to no one. I should have left a long time ago, but I hadn't. I stayed, believing blood meant something, that if I just gave more, tolerated more, maybe eventually I'd be seen. I didn't notice the nurse return until she cleared her throat. "Sorry," she said, holding a clipboard. "I didn't want to interrupt." "It's fine." She glanced down, then looked up again, hesitating. "There's someone here from billing. They have some questions about your insurance policy." I furrowed my brow. My insurance? She nodded. They're in the hallway. Want me to send them in? I nodded slowly, already feeling the shift in air. Something was coming. I could sense it, and it wouldn't be kind. As the billing rep entered, clipboard in hand, and began speaking in that measured tone reserved for bad news, I realized something had changed behind the scenes. Papers shifted, names crossed, decisions made without me. She said something about my status changing, about authorization being declined, that my emergency contact had adjusted my dependent status. Words floated around like static: pending coverage, authorization denial, policy reassignment. I blinked hard. Who's listed as my emergency contact? She scanned the paper. Damaris Goodwin. Of course. I leaned back against the pillow, not out of weakness but calculation. Things weren't just unfair, they were manipulated. The woman left, offering a card to call the provider directly. I placed it on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling again, but not like before. Now, I wasn't a child lighting candles in the dark. I wasn't the girl apologizing for someone else's violence. I was the woman they underestimated. And that was their mistake. I spent one more night in the hospital. They said they wanted to monitor the swelling, but I think it was really about liability. Either way, I didn't argue. I wasn't in a rush to return to a place that had become foreign while I was gone. Alma came the next morning. She brought my coat, my keys, and a small bag of essentials she somehow knew I'd forgotten. She didn't speak much, just drove, hands at 10 and 2, eyes locked ahead. The quiet between us wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence only two women who've carried too much for too long can share without explanation. When she pulled up outside my apartment, I hesitated. It looked smaller than I remembered, even though nothing had changed. The same blue siding, the cracked step on the porch. But now it all felt too tight, like the walls had pulled closer while I was gone. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Everything was in its place, yet something was off. My couch, my lamp, my framed print of that Oregon coastline, it all sat untouched, and yet the air felt heavier. Alma stayed just long enough to make sure I could get up the stairs, then squeezed my hand and left. Call me, she said, then paused. Only if you want to. No pressure. I nodded. Thank you. The door closed behind her, and the weight of being alone settled over me like a second skin. I needed to do something, anything, to keep from thinking too long. So I unpacked the bag Alma had brought, put the kettle on, and sat at my kitchen table. That's when I noticed the mail, stacked on the counter, untouched from before the hospital. I started sifting through it out of habit, barely noticing the familiar logos and envelopes. But one caught my eye. Bank statement. I opened it, half expecting the usual. Instead, what I saw made my stomach twist. 3 automatic withdrawals, same amount, same destination. I pulled up my banking app, hands slightly trembling now. Over $8,000 gone in 3 months. The transactions all tied to something labeled Velora Revive. I tapped on the merchant info. It listed a salon downtown. I'd never heard of it. Are you kidding me? I muttered, pushing the chair back as I stood. I didn't remember agreeing to anything like this. There hadn't been any conversations, no emails, no phone calls. Nothing. I sat back down, trying to calm my thoughts. The words blurred on the screen. I pulled out the folder I had labeled 2018-2023 bank records. Maybe part of me had already known I'd need this someday. Maybe I'd been preparing for this fight long before my skull ever hit the floor. One by one, I printed out the transactions, highlighting each. They painted a clear picture. Someone had access to my finances, and they weren't being subtle. After an hour of printing, organizing, and breathing through the fury rising in my chest, I called the hospital's billing department. A woman named Karen answered. Her tone was warm, neutral, until she looked up my account. She said. Looks like your insurance policy was changed about 3 weeks ago. Changed? I repeated. Yes, it shows you're listed under dependent status now. Coverage is active but limited, based on household income of the primary holder, Damaris Goodwin. I almost dropped the phone. I didn't authorize that. I said slowly, trying not to raise my voice. I'm 33. I haven't been a dependent in over a decade. I understand, Karen said, sounding slightly more alert now. You may want to contact your provider directly to file a dispute. I can email you the form. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the wall for a full minute. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. Someone had gone into my profile and made legal changes to bind me back to a woman who thought my pain was good. I needed to know why. Not in theory, not in guesses. I needed to hear it. I picked up my phone and called Damaris. She answered on the second ring. Allie, I was wondering when you'd call. I didn't bother with small talk. Why did you change my insurance? Why is my money going to Valora Revive? A pause. Then, in that tone she always used when she wanted to sound reasonable while doing something entirely unreasonable, she replied, I had to streamline things. Your sister's trying to start something. She needed stability. You've always managed. I let the silence stretch. So what, you rerouted my finances to fund her spa? Downgraded my coverage without asking? You're overreacting, she said, sharper now. You're lucky to have a family at all. We take care of each other. I almost laughed. Do we? I said. Because it feels a lot like you take and I just disappear. You're being dramatic, Allie. I was in the hospital. I visited. You said I provoked her. You said good. Silence. Not denial. Just silence. I inhaled slowly. You didn't just stop being my mother when you said that. You stopped being my emergency contact. You stopped having any say in my life. You're being cruel, she said quietly. No, I replied. I'm being awake. I hung up. Not out of anger, but clarity. Back at the kitchen table, I opened the bank folder again and pulled out a fresh sheet. On the top, I wrote in block letters, Fraud. Timeline of transfers, 2019 to present. I stapled the first batch of printouts and whispered, Let's see how long you've been lucky, Mom. The woman on the other end of the line didn't flinch when I said the words. Her tone didn't change either. Understood, ma'am. We'll begin the paperwork for the fraud investigation. We'll need a formal statement and any documentation you have. I had plenty. I hung up, stood in my kitchen a beat too long, and then moved like a machine. I gathered the printed statements, screenshots, the credit report, each paper a wound that hadn't scabbed over. The folder was getting heavy, not just in weight, but in what it meant. It wasn't just numbers anymore. It was evidence of years where silence was easier than confrontation. By late afternoon, I was heating up leftover rice in the microwave, the hum of the machine filling the kitchen. I hadn't eaten all day, not because I wasn't hungry, but because I hadn't felt human. Now, my body was reminding me I had to stay functional. As I stirred the rice and soy sauce into a chipped ceramic bowl, my phone vibrated on the counter. A notification from Instagram popped up. Valora was live. I shouldn't have opened it. I should have blocked her days ago. But something made me tap. The screen filled with her face, glowing under soft spa lighting, a white mask spread across her cheeks, head wrapped in a pink towel. She looked serene and smug. Self-care isn't selfish, she said, looking into the camera. It's survival. I believe in investing in yourself, and I'm lucky to have angels around me who don't even know they're helping. I stared, rice forgotten. The comments rolled in, heart emojis, praise, people begging to know what facial products she used. She smiled wider. My thumb hovered over the screen. I closed the app without another word. I ate in silence, the only sounds my chewing and the occasional groan of the heater trying to keep up with Oregon's unpredictable autumn chill. An hour later, I changed into jeans and a thick cardigan, tied my hair back, and drove across town to the salon, Valora Revive. It was in a renovated corner unit near the Arts District. Everything about the place screamed curated luxury. Gold-trimmed signage, black and white floor tiles, lush fiddle-leaf fig trees by the windows. It smelled like lemongrass and entitlement. I walked in and was greeted by a receptionist who looked like she stepped out of a commercial. Bright smile, perfect teeth. Welcome to Valora Revive. Do you have an appointment? I kept my expression neutral. No, I'm new in town. Just wanted to learn more. Thinking of gifting a friend a treatment. She beamed. That's lovely. We have amazing packages. Our owner's so inspiring. She opened this place just this year with help from, well, a very generous backer, Allie G. My breath caught. I recovered quickly. That's a beautiful name, she nodded. Isn't it? We call her our angel investor. I thanked her and left before my face betrayed me. As I stepped back into the crisp air, I stood on the curb for a moment, feeling my legs go stiff. I couldn't decide if I was angry or just tired. At home, I sat at my desk and opened my credit monitoring account. I requested a full report. It took 30 minutes to arrive, in big, bold letters. A $50,000 loan opened in January, co-signed by my emergency contact, Damaris Goodwin. Loan purpose, business startup. I scrolled through the pages, numb. Monthly payments were being auto-deducted from a secondary checking account I rarely used, one Valora had access to, just in case. There it was, in ink. My name tied to a business I didn't know existed until today. And my mother's signature right beside mine, forged just enough to pass if you weren't looking closely. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. That would have been easier. Instead, I picked up my keys. The drive to Damaris's house was less than 10 minutes, but I used every second of it to rehearse what I wanted to say. But when I arrived, nothing came out the way I planned. The door was open. Music played inside, some soft jazz station she always had on. I knocked, stepped in. Valora was sprawled across the sofa, glass of wine in hand, silk robe cinched tight. Look who decided to show up, she said without moving. Damaris appeared from the kitchen, holding a bowl of cherries. Allie, we weren't expecting company. I held up the folder. Funny, because I wasn't expecting to find my name on a loan application for a spa I've never stepped foot in. Valora chuckled. You're so dramatic. Don't, I snapped. Don't say that word again. Not to me. Damaris sighed like I was exhausting her. We didn't think you'd mind. You never say no. I looked at her, really looked at her. The way she held her chin up, the dismissive tilt of her head. The way Valora smiled in the background, smug and self-satisfied, sipping from a glass she probably didn't buy. You're right, I said finally. I never say no. They both relaxed a little. That's the thing about people who manipulate. They expect your patterns to stay loyal. But that stops today, I continued, my voice cutting clean through the air. You forged my signature. You took out debt in my name. You funneled money through accounts I trusted you with. That's not family. That's fraud. Damaris's face paled, but she recovered fast. Sweetheart, don't make this bigger than it is. You already did. I turned and walked out before she could throw another excuse at me. In my car, with the windows rolled up, I pulled out my phone, found the number for my bank's fraud line, and hit call. When the agent picked up, I didn't hesitate. Hi, I'd like to begin a fraud claim. Yes, against a family member. Valora's voice was still in my ears when I stepped back into my apartment. Let's play, she'd said. I didn't need to ask what that meant. With her, everything was a game. One where she always played the victim when she lost, and the queen when she won. But I wasn't playing anymore. I placed the letter copies down on the kitchen counter. The originals were already with the notary, with stamped proof of filing, copies sent to both the bank and my lawyer. It had taken 3 hours that morning to notarize everything, but I did it without flinching. For the first time, I wasn't hesitating. I was acting. Still, the weight of what I had started sat heavy on my shoulders. It's one thing to file paperwork. It's another to challenge the people who've made you question your own worth for decades. I brewed tea, not because I wanted it, but because I needed the motion, the heat, the grounding. Outside, the sun dipped toward late afternoon, casting amber streaks through the blinds. I opened my phone, half out of habit, half to distract myself. A familiar red notification was at the top. Valora was live again. I paused. I should have ignored it, but I tapped anyway. There she was, full glam, wine glass in hand, seated in what looked like my old living room chair. The one she'd insisted clashed with her aesthetic 2 years ago. I guess it grew on her. People ask me all the time how I got where I am, she said, tossing her curls. And I tell them hard work, hustle, and cutting off dead weight. A laugh. From her. Then she lifted her glass. Some folks spend their whole lives being bitter because they didn't know how to use what they had. I used what I had, even if it came with strings, even if it came with a dumb sister who never said no. The comments poured in like confetti, laughing emojis, preach queen, tell 'em sis. She grinned at the camera. Everything I have, I earned. Well, minus the dumb sister's help. I didn't react. Not outwardly. I just pressed the screen until the live ended, then placed the phone face down on the counter. My hands weren't shaking. My chest wasn't tight. That surprised me. Instead, I felt something colder, calmer, like a steel door had clicked shut behind my ribs. This wasn't just disrespect. It was a declaration. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't scared. She thought she'd win again. I left the tea untouched and grabbed my bag. There was one more piece I needed to check before moving forward, one more thread she might have pulled without me noticing. 20 minutes later, I was walking into the county property records office, a squat beige building 2 blocks from City Hall. The receptionist behind the window greeted me with the usual transactional cheer. "I need to check the title on a property," I said. "Address?" she asked. I gave it, my condo, my home. She typed for a moment, then paused. "Do you have ID?" I handed it over. Her eyes scanned it, then flicked to the screen again. "I'm sorry," she said, tone shifting. "The title was transferred 3 months ago." My breath caught. Transferred to who? Valora Goodwin. There was a long pause. I didn't blink. "Do you have the paperwork on file?" She nodded, printing a sheet. I stared at the black and white document, my signature scribbled at the bottom, except it wasn't mine. Close, but not exact. A forgery. I took the printout and walked back to my car. My steps were steady, but inside me, something fractured again. Valora hadn't just stolen from me. She'd erased me. By early evening, I was standing outside Damaris's house again. The porch light was on, the same floral wreath on the door from last spring still hanging. I rang once. Valora opened the door, wineglass still in hand. "Did you bring a peace offering?" she asked. I didn't respond. I walked in. Damaris sat in the living room, flipping through a catalog like this was just any other day. "You changed the title on my condo," I said, holding up the printout. She glanced up, her expression unreadable. "Valora needed a stable place." "You mean she needed my life?" Valora laughed behind me. "You're just mad because I know how to use what's given to me." I turned to her. "Next time you use me, Valora, read the terms." She raised her eyebrows. "Is that supposed to scare me?" I turned back to Damaris. "I've filed. It's done. Fraud, theft, and you, co-signer and emergency contact, are liable. You signed the loan papers. You redirected my insurance. And now this." She stood up, finally. "Allie, we're family." "No," I said quietly. "You just share my blood." I left without waiting for more excuses. Back at home, I placed the second set of documents, property theft, into the file. Then I sealed the envelope, addressed it to the district attorney's office, and dropped it in the mailbox before the last pickup. It was dark when I returned, headlights passing as I stepped back inside. I felt it before I saw it. Valora had received her copy. Because 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a photo of her holding the documents in one hand and a single line of text. "So she wants to play hard? Let's play." I locked the screen. Let her play. I had already started building the rules. It was barely 9 a.m. when the voicemail came through. I was still in my robe, sipping black coffee at the kitchen table, going over my list of documentation for the attorney. I hadn't planned to check my phone until later, but the screen flashed with Damaris's name, followed by a short message. I listened to it only once. "You've always been a disappointment, Allie. Don't call here again." That was it. No explanation, no hesitation, just a sentence wrapped in glass and left on my doorstep to step on barefoot. I didn't cry. The version of me that would have crumbled under that kind of dismissal no longer lived here. What I felt instead was something much sharper, a sense of cold confirmation. She'd chosen Valora. Again. But this time, she didn't even pretend to hide it behind moral platitudes. I put the phone down and moved back to my papers. My fingers worked automatically, sorting through account summaries, utility bills, flagged charges, all the fragments of my identity that had been stripped without permission. I added the voicemail transcript to the binder. Mid-morning sunlight came through the blinds, painting soft lines across the countertop. I stared at them, blinking. I had once believed light made everything clearer, but clarity didn't always bring comfort. Sometimes, it simply made the shape of betrayal easier to trace. By early afternoon, Alma showed up, unannounced but not uninvited. She came with that slow, deliberate calm she always carried, like a woman who knew exactly what silence could teach when used properly. "I brought tea," she said, holding up a small thermos. "Didn't know if you'd eaten." I hadn't, but I didn't say that. We sat in my living room, not speaking for several minutes. Just the two of us, legs crossed, hands wrapped around warm cups. She didn't ask me to talk. She never did. Eventually, I nodded toward the pile of evidence on the coffee table. I kept everything. Every voicemail. Every time she borrowed my card. Every fake apology. I think part of me always knew I'd need proof. Alma tilted her head. And now? I took a slow breath. Now I use it. I pulled out an old phone from the kitchen drawer, the one I hadn't touched in years but had never thrown out. I charged it earlier that morning, anticipating this moment. Alma leaned in as I scrolled through the old voicemail box, each entry like a tiny thorn under the skin. Then I reached one I hadn't heard in a long time, dated July 2020. I pressed play. Damaris's voice crackled first. "She's too soft to fight us. As long as she pays, we're safe." Then Valora's reply. "If she resists, I'll hurt her." Again. The recording ended. The silence afterward was heavier than the words. Alma didn't blink. "You have more?" I nodded, my voice even. "I have photos. Of bruises. Of checks I didn't sign. And now this." We stared at the phone for a while before I said it. "Time to fight louder." Alma squeezed my hand once, gently. "You're ready?" Later that afternoon, I called the attorney Alma had recommended months ago. His assistant answered, then transferred me. When he picked up, his voice was warm, but clipped, efficient. "Miss Goodwin, I've reviewed the documents you sent yesterday. I believe we have a very strong case." "I'm ready to file everything," I told him. "Good. We'll begin with the property and financial fraud, then add medical assault and emotional abuse once we get the police transcripts." I added the audio file and medical photos to the shared drive he'd created. When it finished uploading, I stared at the screen. "This isn't revenge," I said. "I never assumed it was," he replied. "It's restitution." After the call, I walked out to the mailbox and found a padded envelope waiting. No return address. Inside was an old photo, me, maybe 10 years old, standing next to my dad on the back porch. He had one hand on my shoulder, and I was mid-laugh, squinting into the sun. Tucked behind the photo was a note in Alma's handwriting. "He always said you were the brave one." That evening, I opened my email. Dozens of unread messages had piled up while I was focused on legal filings. One stood out, subject line, "Summons issued." I clicked. Attached were PDFs, formal charges of fraud, theft, battery. Valora was officially being served. Somewhere across town, I imagined her opening the same email, her manicured hand hovering above the mouse, her stomach turning. She recorded us. That's what she'd say, I was sure. As if the act of telling the truth was more offensive than what they did in the first place. But I wasn't worried about her reaction, because for once, my voice wasn't a whisper, it was a record. The buzz from my phone came at 7:42 a.m., sharp and jarring. I had just zipped up the side of my slacks, steadying myself in the bathroom mirror. My reflection stared back at me, hair pinned, blouse crisp, no trace of the woman who'd once apologized to the same people she was about to face. The message was from Alma. "Parking is a nightmare. I grabbed us a bench inside." Of course she did. By 8:15, I was walking through the sliding doors of the Marion County Courthouse. My palms weren't sweating, but I could feel a pulse in them. The folder I carried was light but full of weight. Copies of the loan documents, title transfer, printouts of Valora's livestream captions, the hospital report, my statements. All filed, all real, all enough. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Alma sat upright on a bench, legs crossed at the ankle, hands folded. She looked like a schoolteacher again, like she had a quiz up her sleeve. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. Numb. Focused. "You look ready." I didn't answer. Just held the folder to my chest and took a breath as the bailiff opened the courtroom door. Inside, the gallery was sparsely filled. 2 strangers, 1 court clerk, a judge with readers pushed halfway down her nose, and then Valora and Damaris. Valora wore head-to-toe white like she was auditioning for forgiveness. Damaris wore navy blue, her lips painted dark, hair pulled into a bun that screamed control. Neither looked at me as I entered. We took our seats. Alma on my right, my attorney Mr. Keeley to my left. When the judge called the session to order, the silence was surgical. Valora leaned toward Damaris and whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "This? This is her revenge tour?" I didn't flinch. The judge cleared her throat. "This hearing concerns civil complaints filed by Ms. Allie Goodwin, alleging financial fraud, medical negligence, identity theft, and property misappropriation against Mrs. Valora Goodwin and Mrs. Damaris Goodwin." Valora leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. Damaris stayed stone still. Mr. Keeley stood first. He was concise, no theatrics, just the facts. As he laid out the sequence of events, I watched the judge. Her pen scratched quietly, but her eyebrows arched when he mentioned the forged title. When he played the voicemail from 2020, everything changed. "She's too soft to fight us. As long as she pays, we're safe. If she resists, I'll hurt her." Again, no one moved. Valora's eyes narrowed, her arms dropping to her lap. Damaris blinked for the first time in 10 minutes. Then came the exhibits. The screenshots of the live streams, Valora's statements about dumb sisters, financial records tied to the salon, property title transfer with my falsified signature. Damaris's lip quivered, just once. Valora turned to the judge and said too loudly, "She knew what she was doing. She let us—" "Miss Goodwin," the judge cut in, firm. "You will remain silent unless asked to speak." The rest of the morning passed in steady, brutal rhythm. My lawyer didn't miss a beat. When the opposing counsel tried to downplay my injuries, he presented the ER photos. When they argued I'd never said no before, he countered, "Silence does not equal consent, particularly when intimidation is involved." By noon, the judge called for a recess. I stepped outside to the bench where Alma had first sat that morning. She passed me a water bottle and said nothing. At 1:30, we reconvened for the ruling. Everyone stood. The judge remained seated. "In reviewing the evidence submitted, this court finds in favor of Ms. Allie Goodwin," she began. I didn't breathe. "Ms. Valora Goodwin is hereby ordered to pay restitution totaling $83,400 in damages, inclusive of financial loss, unauthorized use of personal accounts, and emotional distress. Property title to 218 East Overlook Drive shall be returned to Ms. Allie Goodwin within 14 business days. A 3-year restraining order is granted against both defendants, effective immediately." She turned her gaze to Damaris. "Miss Damaris Goodwin, your role in co-signing fraudulent financial instruments, manipulating insurance coverage, and transferring property without lawful authority has resulted in your removal as next of kin on all medical and legal documents pertaining to the plaintiff. Furthermore, you are hereby ordered to vacate 218 East Overlook Drive within 10 business days." I exhaled. Not relief. Something quieter, more solid. The judge closed with, "This court hopes all parties will use this ruling as an opportunity to redefine boundaries with integrity. Session is adjourned." The gavel cracked once, sharp and final. We filed out into the afternoon sun. Cameras had gathered outside, local reporters whispering as Valora emerged. She kept her head high until one of them asked, "Any comment on today's ruling?" Valora paused, pulled off her sunglasses, tossed them toward the camera. "This isn't over," she shouted. I walked past her, calm, steady. "Yes, it is." And then I kept walking. The courthouse faded in my rearview mirror as I drove through town. The streets were quiet, the light that peculiar shade of late autumn gold, too warm for the cold it carried. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. The war was over, and the battlefield was behind me. Back at my apartment, I stepped inside and locked the door behind me out of habit, even though for the first time in months, maybe years, it felt unnecessary. There was a stillness in the air that didn't feel suffocating. It felt earned. I slipped off my shoes and walked straight to the kitchen. The leftover takeout from the night before was still in the fridge. I microwaved it without ceremony, spooned it onto a plate, and sat at the table. That's when I noticed the package. It had been pushed through the mail slot and sat awkwardly against the baseboard like it hadn't quite made it to where it was supposed to be. A small padded envelope, handwriting I hadn't seen in years, but immediately recognized. Dad. I hadn't seen his handwriting since before he passed. He died when I was 11, a sudden heart attack in his sleep. No warning, no goodbye. It wrecked what little peace the household had. And Damaris, in her way, took that loss and forged it into a reason for every terrible thing she and Valora did next. But now here it was. His script. Familiar, uneven, full of life. Hands trembling for the first time in days, I opened the package. Inside, a faded photo slid out. Me, maybe 6 years old, sitting on Dad's shoulders in our backyard. My face was all teeth, eyes closed mid-laugh, his hands strong and steady around my legs. Behind us, the fence leaned slightly to one side, the same fence Damaris refused to fix for years afterward. Underneath the photo was a folded birthday card, the kind you'd find in a drugstore, cartoon bear with a party hat. Inside, in his unmistakable scrawl, "You don't owe anyone your light. You just need to keep it burning." No date, no signature. Just that. Tears came, not because I was sad, but because I finally understood the difference between being loved and being managed. He had seen it then. Maybe not the whole future, but enough to leave a message behind. A torch in case everything else went dark. At the bottom of the envelope, tucked beneath the cardboard liner, was a small thumb drive. I stared at it for a moment before walking it over to my laptop. The folder opened quickly, no password, just a series of MP4 files labeled by month and year, nanny cam footage, from the old house. I hadn't even realized one had been installed. Maybe Dad had done it during one of his fix-it weekends. Maybe Alma had copied the files later. Either way, someone had kept them. The first clip was dated April 2009. I clicked. The camera angle was from the living room bookshelf, angled toward the front hallway. There I was, 12 years old, clutching a gift bag, face lit with excitement. I turned toward the staircase. Valora snatched the bag from my hands. I flinched. She opened it, rifled through, then dumped the contents on the floor. Damaris appeared a second later, frowning at the mess, but said nothing to Valora. Instead, she waved at me to clean it up. Next clip. December 2010. Christmas morning. I handed Damaris a card. She didn't open it, just placed it on the counter without looking. Valora received a pair of earrings and screamed with joy. I clapped for her. The next clip hurt most. Summer 2011. A heated exchange. Valora shoved me into the wall. My head hit the frame of the hallway door. I cried. Damaris stepped between us, not to help me, but to scold me. "She has a temper, Allie. You know that. Why do you provoke her?" Watching it now, the truth wasn't subtle. It was loud, obvious, documented. I sat back, breath caught in my chest. So many years I spent wondering if I was imagining things, if I was too sensitive, if I remembered it wrong. But there it was, pixelated proof. The front door opened slowly. I turned. Alma stepped inside. She carried 2 mugs and a small cloth bag. "I figured you hadn't eaten much," she said. "I'm okay," I replied, voice tight. She sat across from me and glanced at the screen. "You found it." I nodded. "I didn't know if you'd be ready," she said, "but I kept them, just in case." I didn't speak for a while. Eventually, I whispered, "I wasn't crazy." "No," she said firmly. "You weren't, but they needed you to believe you were." The next hour passed in a quiet rhythm, sips of tea, occasional glances at the files. At one point, I looked over at Alma and asked, "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" She exhaled, slowly. "Because the cost of stepping into someone else's family is higher than most people think. I thought your mother would change. I thought maybe I had it wrong. And now? I know I didn't. And neither did you." It was dark outside when she left. I walked her to the door, hugged her for the first time in years, and closed it gently behind her. Later, I stood by the window, looking out over the sleepy streets of Salem. Porch lights glowed. A couple walked their dog under yellow street lamps. Someone watered their lawn too late in the season. I held the photo of Dad in my hand and whispered, "I'll keep it burning, Dad. But now, it's only mine to give." The next 3 weeks passed slower than I expected. Not sluggish or stagnant, just unhurried, measured, like time had taken a breath and finally decided to move at a human pace. Not the frantic sprint I'd gotten used to. Not the constant scrambling to fix, to explain, to prove. Just the simple unfolding of days as they were, without demand. I started volunteering at a small domestic abuse support center just outside the city. Alma had mentioned it one afternoon, almost offhandedly, as if she knew I might need it before I did. "Just stop in," she said. "You don't have to do anything big, just be there." So I did. The first few days, I barely spoke. I folded brochures, I wiped down folding tables, I brewed coffee and restocked tissues. I smiled at women who barely made eye contact. Some were older than me, some younger. Most of them looked like they carried their entire lives in their shoulders. Some whispered when they spoke, some didn't speak at all, but they saw me. And when one woman finally leaned over during group one day, eyes tired and searching, and asked, "How did you get free?" I didn't hesitate. I stopped asking permission. It landed. I saw the ripple in her expression, not shock, recognition. Later that afternoon, as I waited for the elevator in the lobby, I caught sight of myself in a wall-length mirror. For a second, I didn't recognize the face looking back. It wasn't exhaustion or trauma I saw. It was something softer, a kind of quiet I hadn't worn in years. A stillness I remembered only faintly, like a childhood memory of riding on my father's shoulders, safe and high above the world. At home, things were still and steady, not hollow, not lonely, just still. My mornings found their own rhythm. A cup of coffee I actually enjoyed. A walk around the block where I didn't flinch at footsteps behind me. Reading a book because I wanted to, not because I needed to analyze it for someone else's approval. The court ruling had brought legal closure, but healing wasn't bound by paperwork. It was unfolding in small ways, every day. Damaris called 5 times that first week. I didn't answer once. Her last voicemail came on a Thursday. I played it on speaker, letting her words echo across the quiet kitchen. "I only wanted to protect your sister." I deleted the message before she could finish her justification. Valora, meanwhile, went dark on social media for about 10 days. Then came the flood. Screenshots, out-of-context clips, commentary from people who had once idolized her. A viral compilation video emerged, one that stitched together the worst parts of her live streams. The smugness, the cruelty, the calculated vulnerability, all of it exposed. Suddenly, people started asking the questions I had asked for years. Where did the money really come from? What happened to her sister? Why is she being served papers? She posted an apology video. Shaky voice, flickering candles, dramatic tears. The internet didn't buy it. Comments poured in. Too late. Convenient timing. Accountability isn't aesthetics. Sponsorships vanished. Brand deals evaporated. By the end of week 3, someone tagged me in a blurry photo online. Valora, at a grocery store. No makeup, no lights, no team, just her, alone in a hoodie, buying off-brand almond milk. I didn't feel satisfied. I felt removed, detached from her, from the drama, from the part of me that used to need acknowledgement or apology. I didn't need her pain to make mine matter. One night around 9 p.m., I stood in the hallway between the living room and the bedroom, staring at a shelf I'd been avoiding. It was bare, dusty at the edges. I walked over and placed two things on it: a framed photo of Dad, the one that came in the package, and the official court order, side by side, truth and justice. I looked at them for a long while. No tears, no flashbacks, just presence. That same night, I sat down with a notepad and a pen. Not an email, not a text, a letter. I wrote to Alma. I still flinch when the phone rings, I began. I still double-check the locks before bed. And sometimes, I hear their voices in my sleep, but I sleep through the night now. I don't say sorry to the mirror anymore, and when I say no, I mean it. I folded the letter slowly, like a keepsake, sealed it in a plain white envelope, and left it on the entryway table to mail the next morning. 2 days later, I walked to the park across from the old library. The air was crisp with the beginnings of winter. Gray sky, soft wind. Not cold, just quiet. I sat on a bench near the playground. Kids raced each other in puffy coats, their laughter rising like smoke. A mom called out from the sidewalk, "Watch your step!" just as her daughter tripped and stumbled near me. Her shoelace had come undone. I reached down instinctively, steadied her little shoulder, and tied her shoe. Tight and double-knotted. The girl looked up at me, wide-eyed and surprised. Then she smiled, big and bright, a thank you without words. Her mom rushed over, breathless. "Thank you," she said. "She's always running ahead of herself." I smiled, warm and even. "Some of us do that," I replied. "Until we learn how to slow down." She gave me a knowing look. Grateful. Then took her daughter's hand and walked away, boots crunching leaves with every step. I sat there a while longer, watched the trees sway, watched the leaves skitter across the path like tiny dancers unsure where to land. The kind of movement that wasn't desperate, just natural. I didn't think about Valora. I didn't think about Damaris. I didn't think about courtrooms or silence or shame. I thought about the girl, and how we heal when we pass something on that isn't pain, a gesture, a truth. A moment of safety. I thought about scars, how they stop being open wounds once we tend to them, once we carry them with care instead of hiding them away. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for something to begin. I was living in what had already started. Not every family deserves a seat at your table, especially the ones who confuse loyalty with control and love with leverage. This story isn't just about revenge, it's about reclaiming your voice after years of being silenced. What would you have done if your own mother said "good" after your sister knocked you unconscious? Tell us in the comments. And if this story hit home, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more powerful real-life stories that need to be heard. Hi, I'm Lark. My parents called me useless and told me to never come back. This was after I paid off their $300,000 debt. After I skipped vacations, lived off noodles, and gave up my chance at owning a home, just so they could keep theirs. At the family celebration, they gave my sister the credit. At dinner, they gave me silence. And when I finally asked for acknowledgement, they erased me from the family photo wall. Now they pretend I never existed. But what happens when the one you erase decides to leave a paper trail? It was just supposed to be dinner, the kind where you sit down out of obligation, not appetite, where you pass plates and pretend things aren't cracked beneath the surface. I hadn't been home in a few months, not since the final payment cleared on the second mortgage, not since I'd decided to stop explaining myself. The house smelled like warm rolls and canned gravy. Cliff was already at the head of the table, eyes glued to his phone. Vera fussed with the centerpiece as if that plastic foliage could distract from everything we hadn't said. And Brannon? He sprawled in the chair next to mine, earbuds dangling, one sock half off. "Glad you made it," Vera said without looking at me. I sat down slowly. No hug, no thanks. No mention of the $300,000 I'd paid over the last 2 years to keep this house from foreclosure. Not that I needed a medal, but acknowledgement? A nod? Something? Dinner started like most others I remembered. Brannon talking about some business idea that sounded suspiciously like a pyramid scheme. Vera bragging about Callista's new curriculum project, as if she hadn't always been the golden one. I kept quiet, buttering my roll, counting each chew to stay present. Then Brandon turned to me. "You still doing that finance thing?" he asked, half a smirk playing at his lips. I nodded. "Still leading risk assessment for Trioak." He gave a fake impressed whistle. "Wow! Maybe you can spot the risk in my next venture." Vera laughed softly. Cliff didn't look up. "Actually," Brandon continued, "I was gonna ask. You think you could float me a few grand to kickstart this? Just until it gets off the ground." I blinked. "Brandon, I just finished paying the mortgage. I can't—" Vera cut in, spoon hitting her plate a little too loud. "You always do this. Always throw money back in people's faces. Just because you helped doesn't mean you get to control everyone." "I'm not trying to control anyone," I said quietly. "But I'm not a bank either." Vera's voice rose. "You just want to play savior. You act like you're better than this family because you make more money. Well, guess what, Lark? You're not doing anything special." Brandon chuckled. "All she ever does is hold money over people's heads." I turned to Cliff. "Are you going to say anything?" He stared at the mashed potatoes like they might rescue him. And then Vera said it. "Honestly, you're useless if all you're going to do is throw it in our face." Everything stopped. The sound of the fork slipping from my fingers. The way the air got thick, like molasses in my lungs. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The word rang through my head like a siren. Useless. After everything. I thought about all those nights working 2 jobs, eating granola bars at my desk so I could send money home, missing out on vacations, skipping dental visits, saying no to life so they could keep theirs intact. And now? Useless. I wasn't sure how long I sat there, frozen. Time folded in on itself. My chest burned. But my voice stayed calm when I finally spoke. "I've paid the entire $300,000, I said, looking at no one and everyone. "Every dime. I have nothing left to give." Vera didn't blink. "If you feel that way, then you don't belong here anymore." She stabbed her green beans like she was talking about a grocery list, not her daughter. "And don't come back." Cliff stayed silent. Brandon shrugged, as if I'd overreacted for breathing. I rose slowly, wiping my hands on my napkin. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just looked around the table one last time. My chair pushed back, my plate half full. They weren't going to stop me. Not this time. No one followed as I walked to the door. I picked up my bag from the hook where I'd left it, slipped my coat on. I paused, one hand on the knob, and let the weight of the last 10 years press into my spine, then drop. As I stepped into the evening air, I felt the chill wrap around me like clarity. My heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with something I hadn't felt in a long time, certainty. They told me not to come back. And I think, maybe I finally agree. 3 weeks before that dinner, before I was told I didn't belong, I stood outside the banquet hall, staring at the golden letters stenciled across the glass doors. Family Resilience Celebration. That's what they were calling it. A night to honor our survival, the triumph over financial ruin. I had survived all right. Quietly. At my desk. Through wire transfers and silent sacrifices. I showed up because I was invited. Not because I expected thanks. But part of me still hoped they'd remember. Inside, the room buzzed with the warmth of laughter and sparkling cider. Table linens in dark green and ivory. Framed photos of the house on display near the podium, like it had endured something on its own. Vera floated from table to table like she'd orchestrated a gala, cheeks kissed, arms clasped. Cliff stood near the front, drink in hand, nodding to every compliment like it belonged to him. My name wasn't on any of the signs. I found my seat near the back, past the cousins, behind the church friends. The card read, "Guest of Dorn Family." I stared at it, then flipped it over. Blank on the back. Callista took the stage first. Her voice carried effortlessly, polished and soft, practiced like every one of her leadership luncheon speeches from school. "This home has been the beating heart of our family," she said. "But it was our unity, our shared faith, that truly kept it standing." She spoke of her role in coordinating calls with the bank, of keeping our parents calm through every twist, and how she and Brannon brainstormed creative ways to restructure the household budget, none of which ever happened. Then came the phrase, "If I hadn't co-signed that initial refinance," she paused for effect, "none of this would have been possible." I blinked. My breath caught in the back of my throat. She hadn't co-signed anything. I had. I remembered the bank manager's office, the way the pen felt in my hand as I signed the paperwork no one else was willing to touch. Because I had the credit, because I had the income, because I didn't say no. Vera took the mic next. "Without Callista's backbone, none of this would have been possible," she said. "She carried us." There was applause. People clapped. Some even stood. I sat, still. A woman I vaguely remembered from church leaned toward me and whispered, "You must be so proud of your sister." I managed a nod, but something behind my ribs fractured. My mind drifted. Back to the nights I'd stayed late at the office, eating pretzels from the vending machine just to save enough for the next mortgage payment. The day I canceled my vacation because the roof needed patching. The moment I told my manager I couldn't accept a relocation offer because I was still tethered to a house I didn't live in. And here I was, watching a slideshow flash across a rented projector. Brannon grinning in the living room. Callista trimming a Christmas tree. Vera painting the porch. I wasn't in a single frame. When I opened the printed program, I searched for my name. Nothing. Callista, Coordinator of Family Support. Brannon, Emotional Encourager. Even Cliff had Moral Steward written under his name. There was no lark, no mention of the money, no line at the bottom thanking all contributors. Brannon wandered over with a half-filled glass and a crooked smile. "Loosen up," he said. "You didn't do it for the credit, right?" He didn't wait for an answer. He never needed one. I stared down at my speech draft, tucked neatly in the side of my purse. I had written it 3 days ago, in case someone handed me the mic. A few words about perseverance, about second chances. It didn't matter now. I slipped it out, tore it in half. Dessert hadn't even been served yet. But I stood, smoothed my skirt, and pushed in my chair. Nobody noticed. As I passed the front table, I caught Vera's eye. She was laughing at something Brannon said. I don't even think she saw me walk by. Outside, I waited for the valet. The night air stung a little, not from the cold, but from the stillness. I unlocked my phone, opened the draft folder, and deleted the only speech I'd ever written for myself. This wasn't my celebration. It never had been. I just paid the invoice. 2 weeks had passed since the banquet. 2 weeks since I watched them rewrite the story I had paid for. I told myself I wouldn't look back, wouldn't dig, but the silence that followed only made the questions louder. Late one Thursday evening, I sat cross-legged on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by unopened folders, worn bank statements, and years of quiet obedience. I'd already brewed a second cup of tea I wouldn't finish. My phone rested on the table, screen dark, notifications muted. I wasn't avoiding anyone. No one was reaching out. I started flipping through my payment history, not for proof, just to remind myself that I hadn't imagined it, that I had, in fact, paid every installment on time. One entry from 18 months ago made me pause. A wire labeled Final Mortgage Clearance that I didn't remember marking as final. The amount, $14,800, was higher than usual, and the destination account didn't match the regular routing number I had saved. My chest tightened. I logged into my bank's online portal, pulled up the full transfer record, and saw that it had been rerouted to a joint account under 2 names, Marcus Morrow and Callista Dorn. Not mine. Not even partially. I stared at the screen long enough for it to dim, then went cold again. The next morning, I called the mortgage lender. I told them I was reviewing past contributions and asked if I could confirm my involvement on the loan. After a few minutes of hold music and polite small talk, the rep returned. "Ma'am, the only borrowers listed on this property are Mr. Morrow and Ms. Dorn," she said. I cleared my throat. "But I've been sending payments from my account for over 2 years." "Yes, we see the payments," she replied. But since your name isn't on the original or amended documents, those are classified as voluntary third-party contributions. No legal obligation, no equity. I thanked her and hung up before my voice cracked. Voluntary? Third party. I felt like I'd just stepped into a courtroom without realizing I was on trial. I emailed the county records office and requested a full title history. It arrived in my inbox the next morning. I opened the PDF and scrolled. There it was. My name. On the original refinance document, signed in person 3 years ago at the credit union branch on Reading Road. I remembered the cold pen. The sting of knowing my credit score had become more useful than my presence. Then, 10 pages later, an amendment. Filed 11 months later. My name was removed. No notice, no email, no discussion. The same month, I had wired the $14,800. My stomach flipped, but not with shock, with recognition. I knew this pattern now. I had seen it in every dinner, every photo crop, every speech I wasn't part of. They hadn't just taken from me. They had erased me. The worst part? I let them. I printed the documents, highlighted the dates, circled the signatures. I laid them across my coffee table like puzzle pieces I finally had permission to solve. I went into my email archive, searched for every transfer confirmation, every message from Vera or Cliff asking me to help out just a little more. I screenshotted texts, matched them to bank dates, created folders, labeled everything. Then I opened a spreadsheet. The first row, date. Second, amount. Third, purpose. Fourth, promised repayment, YN. I stared at the blank document. At the top of the sheet, I typed the file name, Family Reconciliation Ledger. I sat back in my chair and looked out the window. The streetlights had just flickered on. Below, someone walked a golden retriever. Inside, my heater kicked on with a low hum. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I'd stay quiet. But I had receipts, and I was done pretending not to see. The last time I drove to my parents' house, I brought more than my usual silence. This time, I brought paper. They'd invited me to dinner for Cliff's birthday. A peace offering, they called it. Vera said it would be good to be a family again. I knew better. They wanted control back. But I agreed. Not because I was interested in playing nice. I came to deliver something they didn't expect. The truth, in writing. It was a Thursday evening when I pulled into the driveway. The porch light was already on. The yard looked the same, too much mulch, solar lights blinking out of sync. I parked behind Brannon's car, shut off the engine, and took a deep breath. Inside, the house was loud with laughter. Callista's voice rang from the kitchen. Vera hovered over something on the stove. Cliff sat in the recliner, eyes glazed at the TV. No one looked up when I walked in. "Hey there," Vera said over her shoulder. "Glad you could make it. Just in time for roast." The table was set for 5. Plates, utensils, folded napkins, perfectly spaced. But there was no seat for me, no name card, no plate. Just an extra stool pushed into the corner, next to the pantry. "You can grab that stool if you want," Vera said. "We didn't know if you were actually coming." I carried the printed refinancing documents in a large manila envelope. Instead of responding, I pulled the stool over and quietly set the envelope beside my glass of water. Nobody asked what it was. Dinner began with Cliff mumbling a prayer and Brannon making a joke about being the favorite child. Vera served, Callista passed plates. I watched them move like clockwork, this well-oiled family machine that ran without me. Or so they thought. Halfway through the meal, while they were praising Callista's upcoming conference in Denver, I picked up the envelope and slid it across the table, stopping it right in front of Vera's plate. She paused mid-bite, glanced at it, then looked at me. "What's this?" "The refinance agreement," I said. "The one I signed. And the amendment that removed me, without notice." Brannon let out a half laugh. "Still obsessed with receipts, huh?" Callista shifted in her seat, took a sip of water. Cliff tried weakly. "Let's not turn this into something ugly." "No," I said, cutting him off. "I'm not here for a fight. But I'm also not here to pretend anymore. I'm not asking for recognition. I'm saying this stops here. If this keeps going, if my name keeps getting erased from things I built, I won't stay quiet. Vera picked up the envelope, opened it slowly. She didn't skim. She read every line. Her face didn't flinch. She folded it again, set it down neatly beside her knife. "You've been digging," she said finally. "Careful, Lark. Bitterness will eat you alive." I leaned in, keeping my voice level. Bitterness is what happens when someone rewrites history while you're still alive to remember the truth. Brandon raised his glass, all amusement. "Here's to old wounds no one cares about." The room went still. I looked at each of them. Vera, composed but calculating. Cliff, always small when it mattered. Callista, eyes down. And Brannon, proud of his cruelty. I stood. "Thank you for the invitation," I said, "and for confirming everything I needed to know." Vera blinked. "Lark, this," I said, gathering my purse, "was the last warning." And then I walked out. No yelling, no crying, no dramatic door slam, just footsteps on a floor that never really welcomed me back. It started with a ping. I was making tea in the kitchen, not thinking about them. At least, not out loud. My phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from my crypto wallet. Two-factor authentication had been reset. I hadn't touched it in weeks. I checked the login history, IP address from Loveland. My stomach tightened. There was only one person who still had access to my old email account. Vera. I'd never changed the recovery settings after setting it up with her years ago. It had felt harmless then, just a way to keep her informed. She'd said, "Family doesn't hide money from each other." Now it felt like a trap I had walked into with both eyes open. By mid-morning, I was deep into every account tied to my name. Investment apps, shared phone plans, old PayPal logins. I started locking things down, changing passwords, revoking permissions. My screen lit up with forgotten relics of generosity. A shared Hulu account, a joint car insurance policy. Then I reached the DMV site. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just making sure no one else had gotten creative. But when I searched the title for my old SUV, the one I had left behind when I moved to Chicago, my name didn't show up. The car had been transferred, sold last month. I called the used car lot listed in the title transfer. A man answered, cheerful, casual. I gave the VIN number. "Oh yeah," he said. "That was sold by a guy named Brannon Kells. Said it was his sister's car, but she gave it to him a while back. Title was clean." My throat felt dry. "Did he have proof of ownership?" "He had all the paperwork," the man replied. "Had the bill of sale and the title signed off. Nothing weird flagged our system." I hung up without another word. I sat down on the floor. Not the couch, not the bed. Just the cold hardwood, where no comfort could soften what was happening. They had taken my name off a house. Now they'd taken my car. And just to make sure they didn't miss anything, they went for my bank accounts too. There wasn't going to be a third round. I opened my laptop, clicked to my Zoom account, and set up a group call. I gave it a title, Clarification. They joined one by one. Vera's face appeared first, blurry and too close to the camera. Cliff next, seated behind her, eyes already tired. Callista wore a light cardigan and kept glancing off screen. Brannon was the last, chewing gum, smirking. I didn't wait for them to ask why we were meeting. "You went into my investment accounts," I began, voice steady. "You used an email I trusted you with. You sold my vehicle, without consent. And for 2 years, I've watched you cash in on my effort, while pretending I never existed." Silence. I continued. "So here's how this goes from now on. If any of you contact me for anything other than a legal matter or a formal apology, I will block you permanently. Not just phone and email. I will have every connection scrubbed." Brannon leaned back. "Someone's feeling dramatic." Vera's expression tightened. "You think you're above us now? That because you moved away and got your fancy job, you get to talk to us like we're criminals?" "No," I said. I don't think I'm above anything. I think I'm done being beneath it. Callista looked up for the first time. Her lips parted like she might say something, but then she didn't. Cliff just stared into the void, the way he always did when decisions got hard. I ended the call. Then I got to work. I reported the vehicle title misuse to the DMV, logged the crypto breach, archived every transfer I had ever sent. I closed the joint phone plan, revoked all shared logins. I changed the email recovery options Vera had once insisted on helping me set. As I typed, I could feel something new building inside me. Not rage, not grief. A border. A final, clear border. That night, as I sat by the window, watching the train lights flicker through the city haze, my phone buzzed again. A message from Callista. Subject line, "You're going too far." I didn't open it, not yet, but I smiled. Because for the first time in a very long time, I was the one drawing the line. 1 year ago, I posted a message on Facebook. It wasn't elaborate, just a paragraph or two, thanking the people who'd helped hold the pieces together while I covered the mortgage, paid off the debts, skipped holidays, missed promotions. I didn't name names, just a quiet reflection on perseverance, a soft acknowledgement of sacrifice. Mine. I wasn't looking for applause. So when it popped up in my memories, a week after the call with Callista, I almost ignored it. Until I saw the notification. Vera Langford has shared a memory. My heart stopped before my thumb could. She had reposted my exact words, but replaced every first-person phrase with Callista's name. Where I had written, "Holding the line while everything cracked beneath us," she wrote, "Callista held the line." Where I had written, "Some things are worth standing for, even when no one sees it," she changed it to, "She stood for all of us." The caption, "So proud of our strong daughter." I didn't comment, didn't message her, I didn't need to. I just screenshotted it, saved it to a new folder titled Rewrites. Then I closed the app. 2 days later, I stood inside the fellowship hall of the local church, plastic cup of fruit punch in hand, surrounded by smiling faces and casseroles in foil pans. It was a community appreciation dinner for families that had endured, as the program called it. Vera had submitted our name weeks earlier, apparently. I'd emailed a short video clip to the church's admin assistant, something modest. A 2-minute thank you to the community for their prayers, a nod to resilience, a tribute to Grandma's faith. I knew the tone to strike, warm but real. When the presentation began, I watched as Brannon's name flashed on the screen under creative spirit of the family. A slide of him finger painting at age 6. Callista followed, heart of the home. A montage of her teaching, gardening, standing in front of the porch I'd helped refinance. My video? Never shown. I waded through the rest of the tribute reel, arms crossed, face still. Afterward, someone leaned over to Vera and whispered something. She glanced back at me, smiled, and said, "We had limited time, maybe next year." That smile was surgical. I left before dessert, again. At home, I uploaded my full video to my personal page and wrote, "Since mine didn't make it to the big screen, real voices don't always fit the narrative." It started with a few likes. Then the comments rolled in. "Brannon, ever reliable. Way to make everything about you again." I didn't wait this time. I replied, right there, public and plain. "No, I'm finally making it about me, period." He didn't respond. The next morning, I forwarded the original email chain, submission timestamp, video link, confirmation of receipt, to the church office. I didn't accuse, just asked if they'd received everything. 3 hours later, I got a response from Pastor Reeves himself. "I apologize, Lark. Your message was received. We'll follow up with the committee directly." That night, Vera called 3 times. I didn't pick up. A day later, my Facebook inbox chimed. A message from Callista. "You're starting to embarrass us. What exactly do you want?" I stared at the screen. What did I want? To be heard? To be thanked? To be allowed to take up space in a story I bled for? No. I wanted to make sure that the next time they erased me, they'd think twice. And this time, I wasn't using my inside voice. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and addressed in Callista's handwriting. It had weight, like it carried more than just paper. When I opened it, I found an invitation, floral border, gold embossing, inviting me to a remembrance tea for Grandma Miriam. I almost threw it away. But I didn't. Not because I wanted to see them. I didn't. But because Grandma deserved better. Because she had written me something once that I hadn't shared yet, and I knew it was time. The tea was set for a Sunday afternoon at Vera and Cliff's house. I arrived early on purpose, hoping to avoid the crowd, to sit with the memory of the only person who never asked me to be more than I already was. The door was unlocked. No one greeted me when I stepped inside. Light piano music played low from a speaker in the corner, and the dining room table was covered with scones, fruit, and polished teacups. I turned toward the hallway leading to the living room, and froze. A collage stretched across the wall, spanning decades. Black and white wedding portraits, Polaroids from Easter Sundays, vacation snapshots, framed prints from Brannon's art shows and Callista's school awards. Not one picture had me in it. Not a school photo, not a birthday, not even the one from the porch steps where I knew I had stood with them, because I remembered the shoes I'd worn. Vera appeared beside me, holding a tray of napkins. "We just used the clearest ones," she said, like she'd rehearsed it. I looked at her, but didn't respond. There was nothing to say. I turned toward the kitchen and walked away. Guests trickled in over the next hour. Neighbors, church friends, a few extended family members I hadn't seen since Grandma's funeral. The chairs in the sunroom filled quickly, and soon Callista stood by the fireplace with a stack of note cards in hand. She smiled softly. "Thank you all for coming. Grandma Miriam meant so much to us." Heads nodded. A few murmurs of agreement. "She used to tell me," Callista continued, "that I was the one with the heart to carry us all, that I was the glue." Something inside me curled, tight, familiar. I reached into my coat pocket and closed my fingers around the letter. Grandma's real words, inked in her small, deliberate script, folded once, still intact. I waited until Callista finished. Then I stood. "She never said that," I said quietly. Eyes turned. Chairs shifted. Callista blinked. "Excuse me?" "She didn't say that," I repeated. "She wrote to me, in her handwriting. I brought the letter." A bead of silence fell like a curtain. Brannon coughed. "Not the time, Lark." I ignored him, reached into my coat, pulled the envelope free, walked to the remembrance table, and placed it on the lace runner beside Grandma's framed photo. "I was the one she trusted," I said. "I was the one she wrote to. While you all were busy with awards and spotlights, I was the one answering her calls at 2 a.m., and I kept quiet. Until now." Callista's face was still. Too still. Vera stood slowly. "This isn't the place." "No," I said, "but neither is that wall." I turned and nodded toward the collage. "She was the only one who saw me. And even now, even in her absence, you've found a way to make her voice serve your story." Gasps. A few people looked away. One woman, a friend of Grandma's from Bible study, reached for the letter, then gently pressed her hand to the envelope like it mattered. I walked toward the front door without another word. Before stepping outside, I turned back one last time. "You can keep the wall," I said. "I'll keep the truth." That evening, as the sky dimmed over the city and I returned to the quiet of my apartment, my phone lit up. A message from Vera. "You humiliated your sister. This won't be forgotten." I stared at it for a long time before replying. It wasn't meant to be. I didn't call ahead. There was no point. They'd made it clear I wasn't welcome, and I'd stopped pretending I needed permission to pick up what was mine. It was early. Too early for Vera to be dressed, which is exactly why I timed it that way. I pulled into the driveway and noticed the garage door already open. A stack of boxes sat by the wall, neatly taped, each one labeled in Vera's handwriting. Old books, winter coats, Misk, Lark. On top of the tallest box was a single sheet of paper, folded in half. Kayla, don't come back unannounced again. It's unsettling, unsettling, not inappropriate, not hurtful, just inconvenient. I didn't react, just tucked the note into my purse and got to work. Inside the top box, under a pile of sweaters I hadn't seen since 2019, was an envelope, unmarked. Inside, my original bank documents, mortgage records, receipts of every transfer I'd made, property appraisals, even the notarized copy of the first agreement, the one with my name on it. Everything intact, everything they'd pretended didn't exist. I sat down on the edge of the box and took out my phone. One by one, I photographed each page, the timestamps, the signatures. When I was done, I zipped the envelope into a fireproof case and placed it into my trunk, right next to the boxes. Then I drove to the edge of town, parked outside a coffee shop with free Wi-Fi, and emailed my lawyer. Subject: Notice of Intent, Equity Dispute. I attached the scanned documents, summarized the timeline, and ended the message the way I'd been rehearsing for days. This is not vengeance. This is correction. By the time I got back to Chicago, I had a reply from the firm. They'd draft the formal notice and send the letter certified by week's end. I approved it within the hour. It felt clean. Not satisfying, not triumphant, but clean. 2 mornings later, Vera texted, "If money is all you want, you've proven everything we feared." I didn't bother replying. I opened Instagram, took a picture of the note she left on the box, the one that said, "Don't come back unannounced again," and posted it to a private group I ran for financial professionals. The caption: "Sometimes the door shuts itself. All you have to do is walk away." There were no comments, just a string of quiet likes, and that was enough. I spent the rest of that day organizing a drawer of old receipts, unplugging from the noise. I deleted their contact info from my phone, not out of anger, out of necessity. Late that night, just before bed, my phone buzzed once. Unknown number. No message. But I knew the silence. It was Callista. A month had passed since the letter was mailed. The silence that followed was louder than any outburst I could have expected. No reply from Vera. No voicemail from Cliff. Just one text from Callista that read, "Noted." I wasn't disappointed. I wasn't even surprised. Some people don't respond because they're guilty. Others don't respond because they still think they're right. Either way, I had peace. That morning, a small package arrived at my apartment in Chicago. No return address, but the cursive on the label was unmistakable. Elsie Monroe, Grandma Miriam's oldest friend from church. I hadn't seen her since the memorial tea. Inside was a wooden box, hand-sanded, corners smooth, sealed with a clasp I recognized from Grandma's bedroom drawers. I undid the latch slowly. Resting on top of a folded silk cloth was a note written in a careful, slanted hand. "Lark, you were never invisible to me. You carried us more than anyone will ever say out loud. When it felt like the roof might fall, you held the beams. You have always been the one who stayed steady, even when everyone else walked crooked. Love, Grandma." I read it twice, then once more. I folded it back with trembling hands and placed it on the kitchen table. There was nothing dramatic about that moment, just a deep, steady warmth, a fullness in my chest, the kind that doesn't beg to be noticed. It just exists. Quiet, steady, true. By the end of that week, word spread that Vera and Cliff had quietly stepped down from the church committee. Some called it voluntary. Others whispered it wasn't. I didn't care either way. Brandon posted on Facebook about being stabbed in the back by greed. I scrolled past. 1 like, 2 comments. One from someone who simply replied, "People remember." Callista didn't respond to the equity claim. Her name was on the house deed. So was Cliff's, not mine. But that didn't stop the letter from being valid. It didn't demand a fight, just acknowledgement. I never expected it from her, and she gave me exactly that. Nothing. In the space left behind, I started something new. I built a quiet little blog. Nothing flashy, just a space for women, especially daughters, who had found themselves paying everyone else's bills and losing their own names in the process. I called it The Ledger. I shared my story anonymously, downplaying the drama, focusing on the details, receipts, documentation, boundaries. Within weeks, messages poured in. My brother took the family business while I covered my dad's chemo. My mom told me I was selfish when I asked for rent after 10 years. I thought I was the only one. We weren't. That space gave me something I hadn't realized I was missing, a version of myself that wasn't reduced to silence or sacrifice, a version that helped but didn't disappear. I didn't win. There was no parade, but I stopped fighting the battle that had never truly been mine. I stopped walking into rooms expecting to be acknowledged by people who never saw me to begin with. One evening, walking home from the grocery store, I passed a house on Elmwood Avenue, beige siding, blue shutters. It looked so much like the home I grew up in that I paused. I waited for the ache, the longing, the tug of nostalgia. It never came. I stared a moment longer, then kept walking. I didn't need their forgiveness. I didn't need a redo. I just needed space. Enough quiet to finally hear my own thoughts, not filtered through guilt or debt or someone else's idea of family. And I finally had it. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Being the quiet one doesn't mean you owe the world your silence. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. I spent years holding a family together that was more than willing to let me carry the weight, then punish me for it. Healing didn't come from confrontation. It came from choosing myself, finally, after being everyone's second choice. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been the one who gave everything and got erased? What would you do differently if you could go back? Drop a 1 in the comments if this story hit home, or tell me where you're watching from. If it didn't land with you, I'd still love to hear your thoughts. Let's talk. And if this story moved you even a little, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's more coming, and you won't want to miss what's next. Hello, my name is Maylene. When I got pregnant, my parents said I brought shame to the family, so they forced me to marry a man they called homeless, as punishment. What they didn't know was who he really was. But that wasn't the worst part. They erased me from photos, took my name off the prayer list, told neighbors I'd run off with a stranger, and while the world clapped for their grace, I was sleeping on a mildewed mattress behind a gas station, 7 months pregnant, wondering how much more they'd take before I disappeared completely. Why would your own family rather shame you than love you? Do you want to know what happened next? I knew the room was going to feel colder the moment I stepped into it, but I didn't expect the silence to bite harder than the spring air seeping through the cracked window. My hands rested over the small swell beneath my sweater, not to shield it, but because it gave me something to hold that still belonged to me. Everyone else in that room seemed determined to strip me of everything else. Dad paced by the fireplace like he was delivering a sermon only he understood. His dress shirt, always tucked too tight, strained against his chest every time he turned sharply. My mother, Velma, sat on the edge of the couch, legs crossed, eyes stuck on the rug, like she was praying the floor would open and swallow her up before anyone asked for her opinion. And Rhiannon, my perfect sister, she leaned against the wall with her arms crossed and a smirk curling under her lip, like she was watching a rerun of a show she'd already spoiled for everyone. "Say something," Dad finally snapped, his voice cracking the room open. "Anything, Maylin. This is your moment to explain." "There's nothing to explain," I answered, steady. I had rehearsed it in my head all day, how I wouldn't beg, wouldn't cry, wouldn't lie. But saying it out loud still made my tongue feel dry. "It's my baby, that's all," Rhiannon scoffed. "Don't play the martyr. You weren't this silent when you let whoever it was do this to you." Velma flinched like she'd been hit, but still said nothing. Cowardice disguised as neutrality. Dad pointed toward my stomach with 2 fingers, like a judge convicting a criminal. "This is not just your mistake. This stains our name, our family. You think your choices don't affect anyone else?" "I didn't ask you to fix it," I said, and I hated how quiet my voice came out. "I didn't ask you for anything." He stopped pacing. That was my mistake, assuming he wanted dialogue. He didn't. He wanted submission. "Then you have no place in this house." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed hard, like a door slammed behind you that you don't realize locks from the outside. Velma stood, walked out of the room, and returned with a black trash bag. Inside, my toothbrush, a half-used bottle of prenatal vitamins, a maternity lotion someone had given me for Christmas, and the Bible I hadn't opened in years, pages torn where I'd once underlined verses in anger. She didn't look at me, just placed it at my feet and said, "Pack the rest yourself, but you'll leave tonight." The rest happened fast. They didn't even argue about it. I wasn't allowed to be part of the meeting that decided my future. My absence, apparently proof of my guilt. 2 hours later, after I'd sat at the kitchen table, long enough to forget what comfort felt like, Rhiannon emerged from Dad's office and leaned over the counter like she was about to offer me a ride to the grocery store. "We've arranged something," she said. "Someone." She pulled out her phone, scrolled without shame, and flashed a photo of a man I didn't know, tall, disheveled, face half-shadowed. "His name is Ezra. He lives out behind the gas station near Route 9. You'll marry him by the end of the week." I blinked, not out of shock, but out of disbelief that she said it so plainly. "You're serious," she laughed. "Serious as your due date. Look, you brought this on yourself. Dad's doing what he thinks is best, for the church, for the family name. You should be grateful. For being disposed of like garbage? For being given a chance to not destroy what's left." That night, they blocked my access to the family phone plan, deleted my email account. I wasn't allowed to post or contact anyone. Not that I had anyone to call. Church friends had stopped returning my texts weeks ago. Silence doesn't always come with violence. Sometimes it just grows like mold, slow and thick. They gave me 7 days. But by morning, I knew I wouldn't last that long. I packed in silence. My room looked smaller than I remembered. It smelled like furniture polish and old perfume. Memories I used to think were warm now felt like dust choking my chest. The sun hadn't fully risen when I stepped onto the porch, barefoot because Velma said I didn't need to wear shoes, where I was going. I stood there for a moment, waiting for someone, anyone, to say goodbye. No one did. The neighbors were already awake. Mrs. Kim watered her front bushes and looked away the moment our eyes met. Mr. Grant opened his garage and then shut it again when he saw me. As I walked down the sidewalk, the wind caught the edge of my too-thin jacket. My fingers tightened around the trash bag strap digging into my shoulder. My stomach ached, not from the weight of the child I carried, but from the weight of what I was leaving behind. Or more accurately, what I was being forced to carry forward without a trace of where I belonged. A woman on her porch whispered to her husband, "She used to be such a nice girl." I didn't look back. What was there to see? I didn't cry when the front door shut behind me, but I did later, when they told me who I was marrying. By the time I arrived at the church, my feet were sore, and my thoughts were too tangled to untangle. 5 days had passed since I walked out of my childhood home, and every one of them had chipped away something I hadn't realized I was still holding on to. Pride. Hope. Maybe even a sliver of belief that someone, anyone, might stop this train wreck. They didn't. I hadn't seen Ezra yet. Not even a photograph this time. Just a vague description. He's quiet, doesn't cause trouble, and knows better than to ask questions. That came from Rhiannon, of course, who spoke about the whole situation like she was arranging a charity drop-off, not a wedding. The church didn't look like it had when I was a child. Or maybe I was seeing it differently now. Less sanctuary, more stage. The ceremony was set up in the back garden where the youth group used to hold Easter egg hunts. A few folding chairs lined the patchy grass. There were no decorations, no music, just a folding table with two mismatched chairs for the signing and a wrinkled cloth that looked like it hadn't been pressed in years. Rhiannon handed me the dress she said she found at a local thrift store. "Be grateful," she muttered, eyes on her phone. "Some people don't get a second chance." "It's too small," I said, holding it up. She barely looked up. "You're not here to be comfortable. You're here to be fixed." No one helped me change. I used the church bathroom, the one with the flickering light and peeling wallpaper. The dress clung too tight across my chest and gapped oddly at the seams. I couldn't zip it fully in the back. I wrapped a thin cardigan over it and called it enough. When I stepped out, Velma gave me a once-over and turned away. Luther didn't even look. The pastor, someone I hadn't seen in years, stood near the makeshift altar with his hands folded neatly. He gave me a small nod, more out of obligation than welcome. "Let's begin," he said, like we were starting a budget meeting. Ezra appeared then, walking toward us from behind the church. He wore a button-down shirt, slightly wrinkled but clean, slacks that didn't quite fit. His shoes were worn at the heels. His face was unreadable, not cold, just blank. He didn't look at me, didn't offer a hand or a word. I couldn't decide if that made it easier or worse. We stood side by side while the pastor read a passage about humility and reconciliation. I heard none of it. I only remember the way the sun hit the back of my neck, how my toes curled in the two tight flats I'd borrowed from Rhiannon, and the single fly buzzing persistently between us. "Do you take this man?" the pastor asked, voice steady, "to be your husband?" "I do," I said, because that's what was expected. Because no wasn't an option that day. Ezra answered the same, low and even. There was no kiss, no announcement, no applause. "You may return to your lives," the pastor said, not even trying to fake warmth. Luther nodded once. Rhiannon took a photo on her phone, just one, no poses, and muttered something about having proof. I was handed a fake flower halfway through the ceremony, plastic petals slightly melted at the edges. I still don't know why. No one offered congratulations. There was no cake, no reception, no small talk, just silence and a few birds chirping like nothing odd had just taken place. Velma walked away without a glance back. Rhiannon gave me a look that said, "You asked for this," even though we both knew I hadn't. Luther spoke only once more. "It's done. Don't contact us unless it's about the baby, and even then, think twice." After everyone left, I sat alone on the folding chair for a while, staring at the grass. I didn't feel married. I didn't feel anything, really. Not sad, not angry, just vacant. Ezra returned with an old pickup truck, the kind that made more noise than motion. He didn't speak, just opened the passenger door and waited. I climbed in. There was no luggage, just the trash bag I'd carried out of the house, and a small cracked plastic bag someone had shoved under the passenger seat. Inside it, a prepaid phone that didn't work, and a few travel-sized toiletries. I didn't ask where we were going. I figured I'd find out soon enough. The drive was quiet, not awkward, not heavy, just absent. Like we were two people occupying the same vehicle, but entirely different universes. The road stretched on, trees passed. I looked out the window and realized I hadn't seen my own reflection in days. Maybe that was on purpose. I didn't expect Ezra to make small talk. He kept both hands on the wheel, his eyes steady on the road, like this was just another errand. Grocery store, hardware shop, drop off the unwanted girl. My hand rested against my belly. The child inside me shifted gently, almost like a reminder I wasn't alone, even if every sign around me said otherwise. Eventually, the road narrowed. We turned off the main strip and passed a series of rusting fences and a shuttered gas station. A weathered sign swung overhead in the breeze, barely holding on by its last bolt. Ezra pulled into the gravel beside it. He didn't say anything as he cut the engine. He didn't look at me. just stepped out and walked toward the trailer parked behind the building. I stayed seated for a moment longer, staring at the dashboard. My marriage started without a promise, I whispered. Only instructions. I stepped out of the truck, one hand still resting against my stomach. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes with a tired kind of finality. The air smelled like oil and rust, a leftover scent from a life that had shut down years ago. The trailer ahead looked like it had survived more storms than seasons. It leaned slightly to one side, its windows stained yellow around the edges. There was no porch, no welcome mat, no sign that this space had ever known warmth. Ezra didn't speak. He just unlocked the door, pushed it open, and walked inside like he was showing a stranger a motel room he didn't own. I followed, though my legs resisted. Inside, it was smaller than my old bedroom. A narrow mattress lay crooked on a metal frame against one wall. No pillows. The ceiling had a long crack running from one corner to the middle. There was a single chair beside a hot plate on the counter and a cup with 3 plastic forks sitting inside it. No curtains, no table, no clock. I stood in the center, trying to figure out where my presence could fit in a place that clearly hadn't been made for more than one. "Where's the lock?" I asked. Ezra looked at me, not startled, just steady. "There isn't one." He grabbed a bottle of water from the counter, placed it near the mattress, and walked out without another word. The door clicked shut, not locked, but somehow that silence felt heavier than any deadbolt. I didn't unpack. I didn't sit. I leaned against the edge of the counter and stared at the single dim ceiling bulb that hummed faintly above me. I didn't cry. I'd already spent too many nights mourning the loss of people who were still breathing. My eyes moved to the edge of the mattress, where a stain had discolored the seam. It reminded me of something, a couch in a lawyer's office. I hadn't meant to think about it, but there it was. 2 weeks earlier, the office smelled like dust and paper. The fan rattled behind the receptionist's desk. Velma sat beside me, hands folded, like she was preparing to pray, but never got around to it. She hadn't said a word in the car, or when we walked in, or when the lawyer slid a stack of documents in front of me. "You're just signing to ensure the child's future is handled properly," he'd said. His voice was soft but clipped, like he'd done this enough times to know which phrases worked best on girls like me. I remember flipping through the papers, legalese everywhere, words like waiver, assignment of guardianship, irrevocable. I'd asked one question. "Does this mean I don't have rights anymore?" Velma finally spoke then. She didn't look at me. She just fixed her eyes on the plaque on the desk that read David Langford S. Quarters and said, "Good mothers know when to step aside." It wasn't a request. It was a sentence. I signed. Because at that point, I still believed they were doing this to protect me. Because I thought fighting meant more doors would close. Because I didn't know yet that I was already on the other side of them. I snapped back to the present as a drop of water landed on my hand. I looked up. There was a slow drip from the ceiling. Rain must have started, though I hadn't noticed when it began. It was almost dark now. The inside of the trailer had no clock, no sense of time. I found a blanket shoved behind the chair, thin and scratchy, but better than nothing. I laid it over the mattress and sat down, careful not to lean too far to one side. The springs creaked, but held. Ezra hadn't come back. Maybe he was outside, maybe not. I didn't hear the truck leave. I didn't check. I laid back and stared at the ceiling, letting the soft sound of dripping water set a rhythm I hadn't asked for. My body felt heavy, but my mind was alert in a way that kept me from sleep. The kind of awareness that grows when you know no one's coming to check on you, not out of malice, but because they've already decided you don't matter. I pressed my palm against my belly. The child inside me shifted slightly, as if offering company in the void. "They think I'm broken," I whispered into the dark, "but broken things are still sharp." At some point during the night, the rain had stopped. I must have drifted off for a while, though I couldn't say when. There was no clock, no ticking, No sunrise pouring in through the yellowed windows, just the soft creak of metal under me and the faint scent of wet dust clinging to the ceiling. I opened my eyes slowly, my back stiff from the uneven mattress, and my body unsure whether rest had happened at all. I sat up, pulling the blanket around my shoulders like it could shield me from more than just cold. My mouth was dry, but I didn't move. I listened for the sound of footsteps or the truck. Nothing. Stillness held its breath around me. Then a knock. Soft. Twice. I hesitated, then stood and opened the door just enough to see Ezra's hand extend toward me. He didn't look at me, didn't say a word. In his palm was a small paper plate with 2 slices of toast and a hard-boiled egg, perfectly peeled. I blinked. By the time I stepped fully into the doorway, he was already walking away, the screen door of the gas station creaking open as he disappeared behind it. I sat at the edge of the mattress, staring at the food like it might come with a condition. I waited a full minute, then I took a bite. It was dry, no butter, no salt on the egg, but it was warm, and it hadn't been left out of pity or duty. I could tell. It was the kind of gesture that didn't need a name. I didn't eat like I was starving. I ate like I was remembering how to let something into my body that wasn't fear. The day stretched long. Ezra came and went without a word, the truck coughing out its usual rattle as it pulled away around noon. He returned with a few canned goods and bottled water, stacking them on the small shelf beside the hot plate. Still no questions, no explanations. By afternoon, the heat had pushed through the thin trailer walls. I opened the small side window to let in some air, and that's when I saw her. A woman, older, gray sweater, sensible shoes, walking along the edge of the lot, carrying a tote bag of what looked like groceries. She paused near the fence, her eyes catching mine. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. But she didn't look away either. For a second, I thought she might come closer. Ask something, say something. She didn't. Just kept walking, disappearing down the road, like I hadn't been standing there at all. The trailer felt quieter after that. I cleaned slowly, not because it needed it, though it did, but because I needed to touch something and make it better, even if just a little. I wiped the counters, rinsed out the cup of plastic forks, and refolded the threadbare blanket. I tried the burner phone again. Still nothing. No bars, no messages, no hope. I'd lost track of how many days had passed since I last heard my name spoken without judgment. That night, Ezra didn't return. I waited until dark, then later. I stepped outside once, thinking maybe I'd hear the truck's engine or see headlights in the distance, but the night was still, thick. The gas station sat silent, its windows like blind eyes, refusing to acknowledge me. I went back inside, lit the small lamp near the mattress, and sat in the chair. There was no note, no sign of where he'd gone. Just the memory of toast on a paper plate, and silence that now felt more like absence than mercy. By morning, still nothing. I considered leaving. The thought wrapped itself around my chest like a wire pulled tight. But leave to where? I had no ID, no phone signal, no address memorized that hadn't already erased me. Walking out into nowhere felt no different than staying here. At least this place had walls. By nightfall, a storm rolled in. The wind pushed hard against the side of the trailer, whistling through the edges of the window frame. Rain started slow, then hard. I shoved the mattress to one corner as a slow leak appeared in the ceiling. The drip pattered steadily onto the linoleum, forming a shallow puddle that crept under the chair legs. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and moved beneath the small metal table near the window. It wasn't comfort, but it was cover. Lying there in the dark, I realized something. I wasn't scared the way I used to be. The fear wasn't of being alone or forgotten. It was the fear of being seen just enough to be abandoned. Again. They'd already done that. Ezra may have left, or maybe he was nearby. Either way, his silence had been a kind of presence that now, in its absence, revealed itself as a strange form of care. And yet, I didn't cry. I'd done that already. In lawyers' offices, in locked bedrooms, on sidewalks where neighbors looked through me. Grief had become a quiet rhythm inside me now, not a scream, but a slow echo. I pressed my back against the floor, the metal table pressing low above me, the rain providing the only soundtrack. I thought about Velma, about the way she had once brushed my hair when I had a fever, about the way she looked at the floor when she told me to sign away my right to be a mother. I had already lived through the funeral of their version of me, and I had survived it. The air inside the trailer had grown still by early dawn, warm from the storm's leftover humidity. My body was stiff from curling beneath the metal table, but I didn't move right away. There was something strangely familiar about waking up to silence. Like it had become my default alarm clock, absence ringing louder than presence ever could. Then I heard the door. Not loud, not rushed. Just the soft sound of a key turning and the hinge moaning open like it hadn't been used in years. I sat up slowly, the blanket slipping off my shoulder, and saw a pair of polished boots step inside. Ezra. Except, not Ezra. His clothes were clean, crisp. A pale button-up tucked neatly into dark jeans, no wrinkles, no stains. His beard trimmed down, his hair combed like he'd walked out of a business meeting, not the woods. He held a keyring in his left hand and something heavy-looking in his right, maybe a wallet, maybe a phone. But I didn't process that part. I was too busy staring. "Who are you?" I asked before I could stop myself. He looked me straight in the eye and didn't blink. "You weren't supposed to see this part of me," he said, "but now you should." He walked past me, calm, placed the keys on the shelf near the hot plate like we lived here by choice. Then he turned back toward the door and said evenly, "We're not staying." There was no explanation, no apology. And yet, for the first time since I'd been dropped at that trailer, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't ask for answers. I wasn't sure I wanted them. I simply stood, grabbed my bag, and followed. He drove a black SUV. Not new, but well-kept. Quiet engine, spotless interior. The contrast from the rusted-out pickup was enough to make me check the passenger door twice, just to be sure it was real. We didn't speak for a long while. He drove with one hand, the other resting on the wheel, tapping slightly to a country station, humming low from the radio. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't anything, just motion. Eventually, we turned off the highway and onto a winding road lined with dogwoods and faded mailboxes. Suburbia crept into view. Not luxury, not poverty. That middle space people call stability, even if it's one layoff away from collapse. He pulled into a driveway where a small modern house sat tucked behind a row of hedges. Clean, quiet, neutral. He got out first, walked around, and opened my door. I stepped out slowly. The air cooler here, lighter somehow. "This is yours?" I asked. He nodded. "It was. It can be again. Or something new can be." He didn't wait for a reply. Just walked toward the front door and let it swing open. I followed. Inside, it smelled like cedar and something herbal. Fresh. There were no photos on the walls, no signs of family, just soft furniture, muted colors, and windows that let the light in without asking too much in return. I didn't ask what he did or where he'd been. I knew better now than to look for answers where survival had been the priority. Instead, I sat on the edge of the couch and let myself exhale. Hours passed. He moved around quietly, unpacking a few things into the kitchen, adjusting a thermostat, checking the fridge. I stayed in the living room. No words were exchanged, but I didn't feel discarded. Late that afternoon, the laptop on the coffee table pinged. Ezra opened it, clicked once, then closed it again. He handed me a small folder without comment. Inside was a printout, screenshots of a Facebook post. Rhiannon. Her words were as sharp as I remembered. "She married a stranger for food and shelter. I hope she's not starving." There were likes, comments, laughing emojis, Someone even tagged the old church group. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated. A voicemail, no caller ID, but I didn't need one. "Sweetheart," Velma's voice started, syrupy in a way only guilt could sweeten. "People are talking. Maybe you should take a break from social media. Delete anything that might make us all look worse." Us. Not her. Not Dad. Not Rhiannon. Us. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the neatly trimmed yard I hadn't known I needed. Then I said, clear enough for him to hear, "I need a suit, and a place to work." Ezra didn't even turn around. "It's already being arranged," he said. That night, I didn't mourn what I'd lost. I planned for what I'd no longer tolerate. 1 week later, I stood outside the courthouse in Harrisburg, the morning sun catching on the glass facade like it was daring me to step inside. The building loomed, sterile and official, but I wasn't here to beg. I was here to begin. My heels clicked against the marble floor with each step I took, firm but not rushed. I wore the navy blue suit Ezra had arranged for me, fitted, nothing dramatic. My hair was tied back, makeup minimal. I didn't want to be remembered for how I looked. I wanted the record to show that I came prepared. Inside courtroom 2B, the air smelled like floor polish and old coffee. A clerk called my name, mispronounced it slightly, but I didn't correct her. Not anymore. I was done handing out grace-like candy. I was there to contest a document, one they'd convinced me to sign 2 weeks before they kicked me out. A waiver, a legal form that stripped me of parental rights and handed control of my future child to the very people who had treated me like a stain. The judge glanced over the file, then at me. "You're requesting a reversal of the waiver based on coercion?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you're filing for formal legal emancipation from your parents?" "Yes." There was a pause. I didn't fill it. Flashbacks don't usually come like film reels. They hit in fragments, in sounds, in words you wish you could forget but never really do. Rhiannon once stood in front of an entire youth group and delivered a speech about abstinence and integrity. Values, she called it. I sat in the front row that day, 14 years old, believing every word. What no one else knew was that just months earlier, she had been flown to another state for a quiet procedure, a private clinic, paid for by Dad. But that wasn't my business back then. They made sure it wouldn't be anyone's business now. I filed the statement. I walked out of the courtroom, and when I reached the sidewalk, I exhaled like I hadn't in years. Later that afternoon, I met with a lawyer Ezra had connected me to. Her office was in a small building above a bookstore. No plaque on the door, just a quiet woman in her early 50s who offered me tea before asking for my name. "I'm not here to destroy anyone," I said, sliding an envelope across the desk. She opened it carefully. Inside were screenshots, timestamps, and every document Velma and Luther had pushed in front of me under the guise of doing what's best. She scanned the pages, then looked at me. "You know, most people don't gather this much. They rely on memory." "I've already learned what memory costs when it's not on paper." She nodded. "It's time your side of the story had a file cabinet." Before I left, I handed her one more sheet, Rhiannon's college scholarship application. She'd claimed 300 volunteer hours at the local clinic. I knew the clinic director. I knew the logs didn't match. I didn't say it to be cruel. I said it because I was done being silent. By evening, the story had begun to spread. Not mine, but theirs. Online whispers grew teeth. "Estranged daughter files civil separation from respected church family," read one headline. I didn't share it, didn't comment, but I read the reactions. Rhiannon posted something within hours. "Some people are allergic to peace." Velma texted me that night. "How could you turn this into a circus?" She didn't say my name. She didn't ask if I was okay. Just blamed me for the spotlight they'd earned. I sat at my desk, next to a neat stack of manila folders, and labeled each one without hesitation. What they did, what I know, what they'll never take again. The silence around me wasn't empty anymore. It was structured, like scaffolding. I wasn't building revenge. I was building a boundary. The courthouse hadn't handed me freedom, but it gave me something better: clarity. And that was a start. The next morning came with a dull gray sky and an inbox full of venom, the kind that hid behind polite tones and church emojis. I hadn't even made coffee yet when I saw the post. It was Rhiannon's, of course. A neatly curated image captioned with something that sounded like it belonged in a framed quote at a suburban gift shop. "Family comes with mistakes, but we don't delete each other." Underneath it, a photo from my wedding, or rather, what used to be my wedding. I had been cropped out entirely. Just Ezra stood in the frame, eyes lowered, hands at his sides. The background had been lightened and filtered to look almost hopeful. Below it, she had added a Bible verse, something about mercy and new beginnings. I stared at it, jaw locked, heat crawling up my neck. The comments flooded in. "So proud of you for taking the high road. God sees your heart, Rhi. This must be so hard for your parents." And then, from someone I used to sit next to in choir practice, "You're better than this, Malin." They had tagged me too, not by name, just to her. I was a ghost they couldn't stop dragging into their narrative. I didn't comment. I didn't argue. Instead, I opened a blank white square in my photo editor. No caption, just 3 words across the middle, in plain black font. I remember everything. I hit post. By late afternoon, the digital storm was thick with speculation and Sunday school sympathy. And that's when I heard the envelope slide under my door. I bent down, picked it up, and immediately recognized the careful cursive on the front. Clara Winsley. There was no return address, just a note inside. "I saw them back then. I should have spoken. If you still want truth, meet me." No instructions, no apology, just truth. I found her later that evening at the cafe, 2 blocks down from my apartment. She sat at a window seat with a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Her coat hung neatly over the chair beside her. She looked the same, older than when I was a kid, sure, but still composed in that way women of her generation had perfected. Quiet, watchful, never hurried. "I'm sorry," she said, before I even sat down. "Why now?" I asked. She placed a flash drive on the table. "There was a cleanup day," she said. "The church parking lot. I was recording volunteers for the bulletin. I caught something. I didn't mean to." I took the drive, not sure what to expect. When I got home and opened it, the video played in shaky frame. Luther in the church hallway, face red, hands clenched. His voice rang loud and clear. "That child is dead to me. She's not family anymore." I didn't flinch. I didn't rewind. I uploaded it. My caption was simple. "This is how we were taught to forgive." It took less than an hour. The shift was subtle at first. Likes, reposts, comments. Then came the apologies. The people who once whispered now suddenly remembered how uncomfortable they'd felt, but hadn't said. "We didn't know. We should have asked. I'm sorry we stayed quiet." Truth has a way of growing legs when you least expect it. The next morning, a knock came at 9 sharp. A man in a brown coat handed me an envelope with practiced indifference and walked away before I could ask anything. Inside, civil complaint papers. Luther and Velma Greaves versus Malin Rhodes. Claim, neglect of elder care. Claim, moral abandonment, filed under Pennsylvania's filial responsibility law. Attached were glossy photographs of Velma leaning on a cane at the pharmacy, Luther in bed with a humidifier behind him, and, of course, Rhiannon wiping a tear at Sunday service. They had staged their suffering. The hashtag started trending by lunch. Family first. Ungrateful daughter. Honor thy parents. A local radio station even quoted a church leader. It's tragic when children forget who raised them. I didn't go online to defend myself. I went live. My face bare, hair pulled back, no music, no filter. "There is no law," I said, looking into the camera, "that demands you fund your own erasure. There is no honor in pretending people didn't harm you just because they share your blood." I paused. My conscience is clear. Is yours? Then I ended the stream. The next notice I received wasn't a message. It was another court summons, with my name finally spelled right. 10 days later, the courthouse steps felt different beneath my heels. Not heavier, not lighter, just real. I had walked those same tiles when I filed my petition. Back then, there was still some hesitation, the kind you carry when you're not sure if people will listen. But this time, I wasn't here to be heard. I was here to be recorded. The courtroom was cool and still, like always. No buzz of chatter, no eye contact, just seats filled with faces pretending to be neutral, and a judge looking like he'd rather be somewhere else. I sat alone. Ezra offered to come, but I told him no. Not because I didn't want him there, but because this wasn't his fire to walk through. Velma and Luther sat 3 rows behind me, flanked by their attorney and someone from the church. Rhiannon was there too, of course. Designer bag, expensive blouse, face painted in manufactured sorrow. The judge cleared his throat. We'll begin with the plaintiff. Their lawyer stood and began listing grievances: emotional distress, familial rejection, and an alleged obligation I had failed. There were buzzwords thrown around: moral duty, familial tradition, abandonment. I let them talk. When it was our turn, my attorney stood and said calmly, "We'll be presenting evidence of coercion, misrepresentation, and sustained emotional harm directed at my client." He played the video first, the one Clara had recorded without realizing it. The courtroom watched as Luther screamed into a hallway years ago. "That child is dead to me. She's not family anymore." Then came the documents, the waiver I signed under pressure, the financial transactions masked as support, but really used to cut me out, and emails from Velma about doing damage control. Rhiannon took the stand, swearing she had no knowledge of manipulation. Her voice cracked when she said, "We were just trying to help her get on her feet." Velma cried, dabbing her eyes without smearing her makeup. Luther didn't speak, just stared forward, jaw locked, like it was the only thing keeping him upright. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a closing statement, I nodded. I stood slowly, my palms dry, my heartbeat even. They filed this lawsuit to punish me for surviving. That's the truth. They say it's about love and duty, but it's not. It's about power, about who gets to control the story. I scanned the room. Nobody met my eyes. I'm not here to convince anyone I'm perfect. I'm not even here to ask for understanding. I'm here to say I am not their prisoner anymore. Not legally, not emotionally. Then I sat down. The judge was silent for a moment, then spoke clearly. This court finds the parental claim for financial obligation invalid under the presented context. The defendant's legal independence is affirmed. No gasps, no drama, just a ruling. And yet, in that still room, it felt louder than anything they had ever shouted at me. I left the courthouse alone, walked 3 blocks to a quiet cafe, ordered tea, and sat by the window while the rest of the world moved on like nothing had changed. But something had. That evening, the Haven Foundation hosted its first annual gala in a modest event center just off 3rd and Jefferson. The place was warm, filled with quiet lights, and the kind of people who didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. Ezra was there, off to the side. Clara, too, seated near the back with a pin on her jacket that read, "I see you." I wore a black dress, not because I needed to, but because I chose to. Simple neckline, sleeves to the wrist, and a soft pin that had the initials of my unborn child stitched quietly into the fabric. When I stepped up to the mic, the room hushed without needing to be asked. "I'm not here to tell a sad story," I said. "I'm here to reclaim one." A few heads nodded. This foundation isn't about vengeance. We're not collecting sympathy. We're investing in reclamation, for every woman who was told she had to apologize for her own breath. Applause wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was steady. True. After my speech, I walked down the steps from the stage, back into the crowd. On one of the tables near the entrance, an envelope sat alone. I opened it without ceremony. Inside was a single photo, My wedding day, cropped again. Only Ezra, no me. Tucked behind it, a name tag from that same day. Bride, not invited. Clara walked over, picked it up gently, and folded it in half. "You don't need that anymore," she said. And I believed her. 2 weeks passed with quiet rhythm. The kind of rhythm that doesn't demand attention, but makes its presence known in the smallest ways. Like how I stopped checking my phone every morning, or how the sound of my own heels in the office hallway no longer startled me. At the Haven Foundation, the light from the windows felt softer now. Or maybe I was learning how to let it in without squinting. My calendar was full. Meetings with new clients, budget reviews, a proposal to open a second shelter in the county. My desk wasn't just where I worked. It had become a place where I rebuilt the world on my own terms. That morning, I logged into a secure banking portal, scrolled through transaction records, and clicked Confirm on a wire transfer. The account was labeled Private Trust. Ezra had set it up months ago without asking. No fanfare, no conditions. The total amount, enough to cover the overdue mortgage on my parents' house and the full balance on Luther's medical bills. When the banker asked over the phone, "Would you like to include a message with the transfer?" I said, "No, just proof of payment." I didn't sign my name. There was nothing left to explain. Some debts are paid not because they're earned, but because carrying them starts to feel like dragging someone else's coffin on your back. Later that day, I sat in my car for 10 minutes after pulling into the parking lot near the courthouse annex. The sun hit the windshield just right, casting small flickers across the dash. I reached into the glove box, pulled out my phone, and tapped on a voicemail that had been saved under a new contact. Final chapter. Luther's voice filled the cabin, gravelly and uneven. "I was wrong, Malin, all of it. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to hear me say it. You were right, and I'm sorry." He paused before adding, "I thought I was protecting our name, but I didn't protect my daughter." I listened to it once, then again, not because I needed it, but because I had the right to. I didn't cry. I didn't press delete either. I just let it stay there, like an old photo in a box you don't open often, but also can't bring yourself to throw out. That weekend, I drove out to the edge of the neighborhood where I grew up, not to the house itself, but a park nearby where Dad used to take me when I was little. There was a fountain there, now dry and rimmed with frost. The air smelled like leaves and worn-out swings. I sat on a wooden bench overlooking the empty playground. No kids, no laughter, just wind and time. From my coat pocket, I pulled out a small letter I'd written to myself the week after the court ruling. The envelope was unsealed, the paper creased and worn. I unfolded it and read in silence. "You're not trying to prove you were hurt anymore. You're proving you survived it. That's the difference between reopening a wound and letting it scar. One needs attention, the other needs space." I folded it again, walked over to the nearest trash can, and dropped it in. I didn't need it anymore. Forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who no longer has to carry the weight of someone else's sins in their pocket every day. It's not about opening the door again. It's about choosing not to stand guard in front of it anymore. I took one last look at the frost-covered fountain, then turned and walked toward the car. Ezra was waiting at the curb. No words, just a small nod and the engine running. I got in. We drove for a few miles without saying anything. Then he glanced at me, one hand resting on the wheel, and asked, "You okay?" "I'm not sure that's the right question," I replied, watching the trees blur past the window. "But I'm here, and I'm still me." He smiled. Not a wide one, but the kind that told me he understood more than I'd said out loud. They tried to end my story before it began, I thought, as the city faded behind us. I didn't fight them, I just kept writing. And I would keep writing, page by page, on my terms. Sometimes surviving is louder than fighting. I didn't win because I screamed the hardest. I didn't get justice because I played the victim. I got here, on my own terms, because I stopped asking permission to exist. And if you're watching this right now, maybe there's something inside you that's been waiting to be acknowledged too. Maybe your story was edited by someone else, cropped, silenced, rewritten. Maybe you were made to feel like your truth was too heavy to carry forward. But I'm here to tell you, it isn't. And you're not. Your healing doesn't need to be perfect. Your peace doesn't need to be loud. And forgiveness? It's not for them. It's what happens when you choose to walk forward without dragging their shadow behind you. So let me ask you, have you ever forgiven someone without letting them back in? Have you ever stood your ground quietly and felt stronger than ever? I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story spoke to you, even just a little, drop a 1 below. But if it didn't resonate, that's okay too. Let me know why. Let's talk about it. Let's grow from it. And if you believe in the power of real stories, raw, human, and unpolished, go ahead and subscribe to this channel, because there are more voices waiting to be heard, more stories to be told, and maybe the next one will be yours. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next story.